everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. I am Katie Litanga, a program officer here at ECDC, and we are very excited to have with us today Mr. Patrick Litanga, who will be presenting on working with Congolese clients, supporting client success through empowerment. Please take note that today's webinar will be in listen-only mode, as usual. At the end of the presentation, we will have some time for questions and answers, about 15 to 20 minutes. To ask questions during that time, please use the chat function on the GoToWebinar control panel. I believe most of you are familiar with this process by now. Please feel free to ask your questions throughout the webinar, if something comes up that you want to ask, but we'll wait until the end, until the Q&A session after our presenter presents for about 45 minutes. Over the next 5 years, the United States expects to resettle tens of thousands of refugees from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or the DRC. These newly arriving refugees will add to the current Congolese refugee population of 10,000. Given the increasing number of Congolese refugees over the next several years, it is important to understand the complex backgrounds of Congolese refugees, as well as recognize the unique strengths of this diverse population. During today's webinar, Patrick Litanga will discuss a brief context of the Congolese conflict, demographic information of Congolese refugees, and potential challenges and solutions encountered when working with Congolese clients. He will also discuss the important assets of Congolese clients and how to help nurture these strengths for long-term acculturation in the U.S. Patrick Litanga is a former refugee from the DRC who arrived in the U.S. in 2003. He holds a master's degree in international affairs and political science from Ohio University and a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Kentucky. Mr. Litanga has worked with local resettlement agencies in Lexington and Louisville, Kentucky to provide translation and case management services to Congolese refugees. Patrick has also conducted research on the reintegration of ex-child soldiers and participated in land conflict negotiations and workshops on land conflicts in northern Uganda. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Patrick.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your time and willingness to participate in this webinar. I thank ECDC for organizing this discussion. My name is Patrick Litanga. I'm a former Congolese refugee, and I will be discussing about working with Congolese clients. As a Congolese refugee, I lived in South Africa for 2 years. In South Africa, I learned to speak English, and I got some exposure to computers and advanced modern amenities. The South African weather got me prepared to the cold weather here, of course. In all, I can say that my experience in South Africa was crucial for my integration in the U.S. I was resettled in the U.S. in 2003. As of my educational background, I had an associate degree in development studies from the Catholic University of Kinshasa. So my educational background and my knowledge of English helped speed up the process of adaptation in my new life. However, culturally, I am still adjusting. In fact, my culture is hybrid. Often, I have to balance between my Congolese cultural identity and my American cultural identity that I'm actually building up. In that, there is still cultural expectation that I don't know, some that I don't fully understand, and some that I have acquired but are conflicting with my Congolese cultural expectation. Background on the Congolese conflict. Most of the armed conflicts in the Congo have occurred in the eastern region, the Kivu region especially. There are 5 interrelated reasons that explain the Congolese conflict. For years, the Congolese central government has been weak. Social services and bureaucracy and security have been really weak. The economy has been negative since the early 1970s, and people's livelihoods were governed by chance. Second, the weakness and the absence of a strong central government has created a power vacuum that quickly got filled by armed groups and militias. So when there is no generalized, when there is a generalized insecurity, people begin to defend themselves. 3. In the 1990s, Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi had interest in the Congo. Rebel groups from these countries had been operating in the Congo, and those countries had interest to deal with them. And 4, we also had a demographic concern. The Hutu and the Tutsi conflict in Rwanda had consequences in the Hutu, Tutsis, and Banyamulenge population in the Congo. And finally, 5, the availability of natural resources, the competition over the control and access of them created a perfect condition for armed conflict. Let's talk about demographic implication of the Rwandan genocide. In 1994, following the Rwandan genocide, about 850,000 Rwandans crossed over to the Congo side. Amongst them, there were Rwandans who were ex-FAR. They participated in the genocide. About 30,000 to 40,000 ex-FAR. That stands for the Rwandan Armed Forces. So they were active in the genocide in Congo, but they found asylum in the Congo, in Rwanda, and found asylum in the Congo. The massive number of people, spread in 35 camps created conditions for conflict because the ex-FAR began attacking Rwanda, and their presence in the Congo fed into existing local ethnic tension in the DRC. Let's consider the case of the Banyamulenge. The Congolese Banyamulenge are an important group to understand in the context of the Congolese conflict. They are a small ethnic group in the South Kivu region, about 60 to 80,000 people. Even though the Banyamulenge had been in eastern Congo prior to independence in the 1960s, their citizenship has always been questioned by the Congolese government. There have been at least 2 cases of citizenship revocation, the recent one being the 1996. Because Banyamulenge are ethnically close to Tutsi Rwandan, ethnic conflicts in Rwanda tend to affect them, more so directly. This is why in 1998 they aligned themselves with Rwandan involvement in the Congo. So facing citizenship challenges and the Hutu ex-FAR threat, it became rational for Banyamulenge young people to join armed forces in support of Rwanda, and that includes the M23 rebel group. The cycle of conflict in the Congo has caused over 2.9 million IDPs and over let's say almost 500,000 refugees. In the fiscal year 2014, about 4,500 Congolese refugees were resettled in the U.S. And since 2001, 10,000 Congolese refugees have resettled in the U.S. Though major hostility ended in 2003, low tension armed conflicts have continued in the province Oriental, the Katanga, and the Kivu. Actually, a few days ago, about 70 people were killed in the town of Beni. Ethnic composition of Congolese refugees. Due to the prevalence of conflict in the Kivu, most Congolese refugees come from the Kivu. Historical tension and recent development in Rwanda have caused the vulnerability of Banyamulenge and the Congolese Tutsi and Hutu. This is why the Banyamulenge and the Congolese of Tutsi and Hutu origin constitute the majority of the Congolese refugees. The first country of asylum. Even though the Congo is surrounded by 9 other African countries, including Sudan, Chad, Congo, Brazzaville, Angola, Zambia, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, and Uganda, most Congolese refugees go to Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, in that order. This is explained by the prevalence of conflict in eastern Congo, the proximity of Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, and by the linguistic and ethnic closeness to those countries. Some implication of the first country of asylum. At the language level, we can expect the majority of Congolese refugees to speak or to be conversant in Kinyarwanda, Kiswahili, Kirundi, or Kiganda. The experience of living in those countries, especially in Rwanda, can cause possible distancing from other Congolese ethnic groups. And the reverse is also true. Congolese of other ethnicity and ethnic group may reject Congolese of Tutsi, Hutu origin and the Banyamulenge who have lived in the neighboring country, especially Rwanda. If we were to take a snapshot of Congolese refugee, it would look like this. Families are fairly large, between 1 and 14 individuals. 48% of principal applicants are single. 35% are married. 12% are widowed. 5% are separated or divorced. And single mothers represent 20% of caseload. Unaccompanied minor and separated minor include people of 0 to under 18 years of age. This age bracket represents about 55% of the Congolese refugees. 18% are between 18 to 25, a quarter are over 25, and about 3% are nearly 50 years of age. And then when it comes to the ratio between female and male, female are 51%, and then male constitute 49% of the Congolese refugee population. Looking at the occupation background of Congolese refugees, this includes skilled, unskilled, professional, and farm workers. For the educational background, there are large disparities between rural and urban areas and between males and females. Female illiteracy rate, for instance, is 44%, and male illiteracy rate is 19%. There is an interesting trend in illiteracy rates in the Congo. In 2003, people of 15 to 24 years of age had a higher literacy rate than people of 25 to 54 age bracket. This is very interesting because we might tend to assume that younger people will be more educated or will be more literate than older, but this trend is actually changing, and it is actually showing that the conflict is actually getting to the educational system. Over 59% of Congolese refugees don't speak English. So what are the main challenges in working with Congolese clients? In my understanding, there are 6 main challenges: health, prior work experience, ethnic tension between certain populations, educational challenges, cultural challenges, exposure to modern amenities. Health challenges. The Congo does not have an adequate health care system. Often, people die from benign illnesses because they can't afford to see a doctor. Preventative medicine does not exist. It does not even register with people's priorities. how do you decide between feeding your kids and then trying to treat some possible illness that you might have, or finding a shelter versus preventing cancer or something? This presents a challenge because in arriving in the U.S., Congolese clients will have to learn to navigate the often complex healthcare system. So they go from 0 to actually 100. How do they navigate it? It becomes problematic. Most Congolese refugees have been exposed to atrocities with traumatic physical and psychological implications, such as PTSD, anxiety, and depression. There has been an epidemic of sexual gender-based violence, primarily targeting women, with psychological implications, the stigma. This can lead to domestic violence in the context of the U.S. So many times when a woman gets raped, either it is a wife or just a lady or a girl, there is a stigma into how she will be able to reintegrate the community again, or even to find a lifetime partner. So all that plays into how psychological and physical implication of rape will cause to a woman. There is also a heavy stigma when it comes to mental illness. So these are some of the healthcare or health challenges that a Congolese refugee or clients will bring when they come to the U.S. Educational challenges. As the statistical snapshot showed, there are great disparities in education. Those disparities complicate client integration in the American society. In my experience, often high level of education facilitates integration. In fact, the level of education contributes in the learning and the acquisition of English proficiency. I'm saying this from my own experience. I came here not only having a background in English that I learned in South Africa, but I also had a very good level of French. And the grammatical construction and the French background helped me even learn English quicker. So people who come in the U.S. with some good educational background will tend to adjust quickly and even better than those who come here without a strong, good educational background. Another advantage of education here is that the level of education is also crucial for adjusting to new working environment. For instance, how would somebody learn to have to just perform a task when they ask them to do a work in English? That becomes problematic for those who do not have a good command of the language or education. Some cultural challenges. Again, in my experience, cultural challenges are perhaps the most important because sometimes cultural adaptation requires deep changes in the way one sees the world and engage with them. So cultural bases are deep-seated in people's mind, ingrained in their behavior, in their perception of the world, that sometimes when they arrive in the U.S. here, they have to change pretty much their mentality, how they see the world, how they think they should behave, and how they perceive everything around them. And this is why I'm saying that this is the most challenging of all, because it requires changing your vision of the world. So for example, the notion of domestic violence is different for some Congolese populations. Some might consider physical altercation or shoving or even beating the partner as culturally acceptable. And as you might expect, victims are often women. So what they have in their mind when it comes to the culture can be challenging for them when they have to adjust in the new reality here. There is also a prevalence of corporal punishment for children, which is culturally acceptable for many people. And for some Congolese, it might even be difficult for them to adjust here because they will be told that they cannot use corporal punishment. And for them, it becomes problematic because they don't know what to do in case of disciplining their kids, their children. And that becomes problematic. And finally, the judicial system is different. Congolese clients might not know whether to trust the judicial system here or even whether to bother taking an issue to court. There is a rampant corruption in the Congolese judicial system that people do not trust the justice system. And they prefer doing things on the side or going to a leader or community leader or a brother or a sister to deal with personal or even domestic issues. Now, arriving here, we have to try to have them understand that the judicial system works for their advantage. So it is challenging for them to leap from a context where you didn't trust the justice system or the justice system was inexistent in the way we know it to a point where they have to try to understand and to work with the justice system. That is another challenge that Congolese refugees and clients face. Exposure to modern amenity. For a lot of us, coming to the U.S. is like coming to a different world where information and procedures are sometimes mediated by machine. Even though I personally came here with some kind of background in English and some level of education, I had an associate degree in development study, but getting adjusted to the American amenities, going to the bank or working through online services to get to some answers was challenging. And we should expect that that will be challenging for Congolese who come here without a good educational background and without the knowledge of language, of English. A large number of Congolese refugees have not been exposed to modern housing with internal plumbing, running water, and modern appliances. People will have to learn how to use a stove, for instance, and how to use hot and cold water. Those things seem to be benign and very simple for somebody who grew up in this kind of amenities, but for a Congolese refugee who has never seen it function, it's hard for them to know and to adjust to it. The average Congolese refugee doesn't have a driver's license and hasn't used modern banking. It is not only hard to make somebody understand that they have to use the banking system, but it gets even complicated to have somebody to understand how to balance their check. And even hard so to have somebody understand how to use a credit card. So all those amenities are flown and on our face in a very high speed that we are called to get adjusted to it, to learn how to deal with it, and it is really challenging. However, there's been some improvement in the area of technology. There is sufficient exposure to cell phone, and there is also sufficient exposure to internet, especially for young people. So this is why often, sometimes young people become the translator of the family or the house because they sometimes have an age when it comes to those type of technology. Work experience. Except for professional works, government, large businesses, and NGOs jobs, most Congolese are not used to the shift system with a supervisor, most Congolese have worked in a self-employed mode. What I mean by this is especially in the rural area, because so far about 80% of the Congolese live in rural areas, and they work for themselves. They get up in the morning and they go farming, and they go fishing, they go collecting whatever they collect. Their livelihood does not abide by a certain clock, and it does not require having order from a specific manager. So the shift that we make, and most of us had to make, was really hard, because you suddenly find yourself in a context where you have to abide by the time. If you are late at work, you are in trouble. And you have a strike system where if you miss jobs or work for a certain number of time, you lose your job. And you have to follow specific order or direction, and then if you do not do that exactly the way you were told, you can even lose your job. Those things are hard for people who haven't been exposed to this kind of system to adjust. Here, there is an important cultural element that I think we should really underline. It's the concept of time. For most Congolese, the concept of time is circular. It's not linear. This concept of time assumes a certain elasticity to time. This means that in a lot of cases, people will tend to be late. They will be late not necessarily because they do not respect their job or they do not care. It's simply because their understanding of time is different. It's elastic. It's circular. So they might stay on the road while going to work and then hold a conversation with a friend. They might stay a little bit longer because they were expecting a cousin to call them. And that is important, and then they think everything will fit in that time. However, this conception of time becomes problematic in the U.S. because it's not compatible with the way the American life see time. Here, time is linear. When you miss an opportunity, you miss it, and it might not come back. But in a circular conception of time, time evolves almost like a boomerang, where you think and you perceive reality as a series of events that can come and then go and come again. This is why in arriving in time or getting into a job interview or respecting somebody's shift or even a doctor visit can be problematic, because people, if they are not told, they might get there late and then miss their appointment. Another thing to look at here is the training. Often training is done by apprenticeship, done by official certification. It is therefore challenging to translate some of Congolese professional background to their American equivalent, such as welding, masonry, or carpentry. This is really something to bear in mind, because some of us will come here believing and hoping that I was a welder, I was a carpenter, I was working in masonry. As soon as I come here, I want to work, I want to do that job. It doesn't work because, first of all, most of us didn't go to school for those kind of professionalization, and they do not have a paper to attest to it so that we can get them an equivalent of their job they were doing while they were in the Congo or while they were in the Kivus. So it becomes hard because the client will be expecting to do the same job that they were doing, but they can't do it because there is no way to translate that. There is no certification behind it, even though there is experience in the job, in the work. But officially, there is nothing we can do because we cannot translate their certification because there is no certification. So those are a few things to bear in mind when it comes to work experience. ethnicity, and other sorts of tension. Ethnic conflict that have happened or is happening back home can have tension amongst Congolese clients. For example, the Banyamulenge may experience tension while interacting with other Congolese. This is a really important factor to have in mind, because Congolese who come here, sometimes they bring ethnic tension and ethnic problem that can become manifest while they are here. In certain cases, like a case that I was personally involved with in Lexington, Kentucky, regarded a conflict between a group of family, Congolese family that were in a refugee camp in Kenya, in Kakuma. And for some reason, they had a conflict in Kakuma for some time before being resettled in the U.S. So once they were resettled in Kentucky, they started to have conflict between themselves because of some unresolved issue that began years ago in Kenya, in Kakuma. They transported those conflicts in the reality in the new life in the U.S. So those are a few things that we should be mindful of. Other important things that we have to be mindful of are allegations of involvement in armed group or militia. These things are really, really important because in the context of the conflict, child soldiers have been involved, and in so doing, people have seen them either committing atrocity or being part of the group who are committing atrocity. And then once they find themselves in the U.S., those accusations or allegations can continue. So as they continue, they can flare up and then create tension and even cases of conflict. So as we receive clients, as we manage cases, as we work with them, we have to be mindful of those allegations, as not to necessarily investigate if they are true or not, but a way of trying to see if we can mediate them and then try to temper them down. However, on the other side, resettlement can constitute a form of reconnecting Congolese. So even though on one side we have this potential ethnic problem and these allegations of participating in militia or in armed group, but resettlement is also something very advantageous to us because it helps us reconnect. As we are working with clients, we should be mindful of that and then remember that those issues are happening. Some strategies when working with Congolese clients. In my experience, and then what I've seen from literature, here are some things to be aware of or to be knowledgeable about when working with Congolese clients. Awareness of ethnic tension, as I mentioned. We should engage faith community. We should foster a sense of community. We should support resilience. We should use culture as a strength. There are cultural elements that are really, really a source of strength for Congolese clients. For instance, the sense of family, the sense of sharing. So people will share together, even though when sometimes they are not even related, they will be willing, provided there is no ethnic tension between them, they'll be willing to share an apartment. They'll be willing to share things, to even go grocery together, stuff like that. Those elements are actually useful because they foster a sense of community and they encourage and facilitate integration. We should also ensure access to appropriate health care, and we should provide a general understanding of the judicial system. awareness of ethnic tension. We need to be aware of potential ethnic conflict in the community. This is really important because the type of conflict that has been going on in Congo and in Rwanda or even in Burundi have had deep traumatic impact in people's life. Some people come here with the knowledge that a neighbor killed their brother, a neighbor raped their sister, or a neighbor burned their house. And then when they get here, the cousin of that neighbor who allegedly did something horrible can be held into account. So tension can begin here in the U.S. between people who didn't do anything, but because there are allegations that the relatives were involved, it spread to them as well. We should be aware of that. And we should consider that ethnic tension may lead to conflict. However, it is useful to engage faith and community leaders since their view and their opinion tend to be respected. The Congo, for the most part, is still a collectivist society. It is a society where collective values tend to be respected. And in that collectivity, elders and faith leaders continue to uphold a certain sense of dignity and respect. So if we have those kind of community leaders here and then faith leaders here, we should involve them in the way we interact with our clients. We should be available to offer mediation or have strategies in place to address conflicts. And perhaps, this is in my view, most importantly, we have to be cognizant of ethnic tension during case management. For the Congo, this is really, really important. It is important to know if this client is a Banyamulenge, and that Banyamulenge might be viewed differently by Congolese of another ethnic group. We have to know that if we are dealing with a Hutu Congolese, that Hutu Congolese might be viewed differently by a Tutsi Congolese. We have to have that in the back of our mind as we do our case management. Engaging the faith community. When it is possible, we should connect Congolese client with a church or a faith community. We should identify and engage faith leader in Congolese community with newly arriving clients. In fact, for many Congolese refugees and Congolese in general, faith constitutes a source of hope, trust, and identity. So enlisting the assistance of faith community could help clients adjust and integrate the American society. Maybe I'm kind of repeating that a lot, but being knowledgeable of or knowing where they are, where our community leaders are and where elders are and what they do is important, because we could use them as a good asset to help newcomers integrate in their life. Sense of community. When a community is formed and when we understand whether or not there are tensions, we should connect clients to other community leaders. This is particularly important for single mothers. It can help reduce isolation and facilitate integration. We should engage community leaders to work with our organizations. This is a great source of cultural orientation, community building, and mediation. I personally was involved, even not an elder yet, with the community, the orientation in Lexington, Kentucky. I helped, I participated, because those who are already integrated in the American community, American society, and especially if they are elders, they have an advantage to be a better translator between two cultures. So if we can involve them, it will be a great asset to have. And then if it is possible, we should involve hometown associations. However, we need to be cognizant of possible ethnic tension in those structures, because some hometown structures or organizations have been involved in some armed conflict back home. So if we are aware of that, we should really be mindful and pay attention around them. Support resiliency. In my experience, most Congolese refugees are grateful and eager to start their new life. To further facilitate their success, please utilize a strength-based case management approach. We should focus on client strengths and goals early on the process, such as using a service plan or allowing for appropriate job placement. In my experience, I did some mock job interview. I collected people's skills to see how we can match them better with the job that you have here. Often people can match better with a good job, will tend to integrate better in the new reality. This is why we should really try to see if there's a better way to place people in specific jobs so that they can integrate better and they can also feel better about themselves. And again, consider community leaders as an asset. Develop a partnership with them. Culture. Congolese take pride in their music. It can help with stress reduction and build a sense of community. When, for instance, there are instrument donation, inquire whether some community members play those instruments and whether they will be willing to use them for their functions or in different occasions. When it comes to clothing, many Congolese women are involved in sewing, traditional clothes and goods, provide sewing classes or manufacturing, building skills opportunity. When it comes to food, in many instances, community meetings involve food. And when African food stores or restaurants are available, provide information to the Congolese clients. They will deeply appreciate that. Health and wellness. Assist clients to navigate the health system, which can be overwhelming, even for those who speak English or some English. As I said it earlier, most of us go from no healthcare system or scarce healthcare system to a lot of healthcare opportunities. So between those two, there is like a gap. There is a huge disconnect. And then we have to understand how to do it. We have to understand the importance of preventative medicine. We have to understand the importance of health insurance. So it's a big deal to do that. The work that you have to do is try to have them navigate it. Make sure that Congolese clients have access to mental health service. This is really important because there is a lot of stigma around mental illness in the Congo still. This is why we should be aware of domestic violence resources in our community. If there is some, we should actually provide that to the client. And when discussing mental health, we should use neutral terms in order to destigmatize counseling services. The ECDC has a good webinar on working with victims of abuse. It is actually listed below here on YouTube. If you have time and when needed, you should look at it. And consider alternative ways of supporting clients' wellness, such as community support, mindful practice, such as yoga. So thank you. We can go to the questions now, and I'm handing it back to Katie.
Thank you, Patrick, for that very informative presentation. You definitely provided some very important information and also useful tools in working with Congolese refugees. We are going to go ahead and open it up to questions. And we already have a couple questions, so thanks for sending those along for those of you who already posed questions. I do encourage other people to ask questions now if they have any. So we'll just jump right in. The first question from one of our participants relates to the term Banyamulenge. And the question is, when was the term Banyamulenge first used? There was no documentation mentioned this group during Belgian colonization. So that's a pretty specific question, but maybe since you have some expertise, if you can discuss maybe the origin of that term.
Okay. The term Banyamulenge is, there is no specific time that the term began to be used. The Banyamulenge, the Mulenge actually referred to a mountain in eastern Congo, in the South Kivu, and it is where people of Rwandan origin began settling way before colonization and even after colonization. So the term was used, but not in a very sort of negative way for some time. However, it became really important in the 1990s because of the conflict in Rwanda. It was used, but in a very lightly way in the 70s when President Mobutu accorded a blanket citizenship to the Banyamulenge, and then he retrieved his decision in 1982. So yeah, but the term Banyamulenge became important in the Congo in the 1990s.
Okay, thanks. Moving on to the next question from one of our participants. There's a thin line between mediating conflict and becoming too personally involved with clients. What do you suggest the best approach is in dealing with conflict outside of providing clients with facts and laws within the U.S. alone? This participant says, I constantly encourage my caseworkers to keep professional boundaries with clients to ensure they do not become a part of the issue.
Oh, this is an important question because in dealing with clients, you might find yourself involved. And this is where one of the best strategies will be to use or to utilize the community resource that is available. Using the community resource, as I was saying in a presentation, of elders or faith leaders has two important advantages, because first of all, it distresses you as a responsible in this mediation, and second, it provides you a good source of support as you're going through it. So that's why I will suggest at any time, if it is possible, to try to have a trusted community leader involved in the issue, and do not take things personally. Don't carry the problem in your house, because it's going to be too stressful for you.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. We're waiting for some more questions to come through. So again, I do encourage you to ask questions at this time. In the meantime, I have a question. So I know that you worked with a local resettlement agency when you were resettled in 2003. During the first few months, what would you say was one of the most challenging adjustments that you had to make during that time? And how can resettlement agencies work with Congolese clients to address an issue like this?
I had many adjustment issues. Adjustment to technology, adjustment to bus schedules, adjustment to riding a bus, how to know exactly what time to get there for a bus, and adjustment to getting somewhere on time, especially coming here without a driver license, as many. it was hard to take like 3 or 4 buses to get to work or to get to my school on time. So I had to do a lot of adjustment there. But perhaps the most important was, for me, knowing how the healthcare system works, because I didn't have that kind of healthcare system even when I was in South Africa. So the agency helped me navigate that well. It was really good. The other thing that the agency did in my case was they guided me toward free computing courses in the library, in the Central Library in Lexington. That was really helpful because I didn't know that you could just take a computer class for free at the library. So that was really useful. I had a lot of help, and then it was great for my integration.
Great, thanks. Okay, we have another question from one of our participants. You mentioned that there is a stigma surrounding mental illness among Congolese. Can you talk more about strategies for caseworkers to bring up this issue with their clients so that they can connect them with resources? And I just want to add here that Patrick had mentioned a webinar that ECDC had done recently, actually on this very particular issue. So, you know, if you do have some time, do check that webinar out. It's on the ECDC YouTube channel, and it goes into very good detail about how to address these kind of issues with working with African refugee and immigrant victims of abuse.
Mental illness, for most parts in the Congo, is still not considered as a normal illness. Some people have a lot of explanation around it. Some people think that it's a witchcraft kind of outcome. Some people think that an individual could have gone to find magic somewhere and then it didn't work out, so they became crazy. So they do not necessarily provide a biological or a psychological explanation of it. They tend to put it in the spiritual realm, and then it is a stigma. Some people, when I was growing up, they even thought that if you touch somebody who has mental issue, that could have affected you or something. So the best way to deal with that is try to build some trust with the client. Once you build the trust with the client, you can provide the mental health as an opportunity, as one of the opportunity they can use to address a specific issue. And then there is a great deal of help, like the webinar that ECDC conducted, which is really a good resource to use. But if you haven't built trust with a client, it might be hard to provide them mental health as an option.
Thanks, Patrick. We're just waiting for some more questions. So if anyone has a question they would like answered, please ask them now. In the meantime, I do have another question. You did talk, quite a bit about working with community leaders and elders and things like that. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about maybe some advice you have for resettlement agencies that are looking to partner with Congolese communities. And you did talk about some of the ways to get involved with those communities, but maybe any others that you haven't mentioned, ways to get them involved with the resettlement community and the resettlement work, and also the best way to approach, Congolese communities or even hometown organizations that are Congolese, reaching out to them. What would be the best approach for that?
Among other approach that an organization that works with Congolese clients can do is to know some of the festivities that they do. For instance, if they have an Independence Day and they do have a celebration around it, just to send a representative as a token of as a person to go there for a few minutes and then to participate with them, or if they have a soccer game that they play, to try to involve them. This thing is really important because that's how you can gain access to some of those community leaders. And then once you begin to build some kind of relationship, you know where to find your community leaders, you know what they do in a regular basis, then you can begin to trust them. We have to bear something in mind here. Some community leaders might have participated in different kind of conflict back home. They might be controversial. So if we don't know that, it might be problematic to include them or to use them as an asset into their reintegration, the integration of some clients. So consider what they have, what manifestation or celebration or function they have, be part of what they do, and then they'll be part of what you do.
Great, thanks. Another question from one of our participants. Can you tell us more about attitudes towards child abuse within the Congolese community?
Okay. I mentioned that corporal punishment is still actually culturally accepted. It is normal for somebody to take a stick or to beat their kids or to have them kneel down for 30 minutes or to even tell them that I'm not going to feed you in the next 2 or 3 hours because you've been impolite. In many instances, those practices are culturally accepted. Now, some people will say that, it becomes abuse when you injured your kids, like by burning them or by doing, I don't know what kind of horrible thing that you can do. In some community, it's at that point where they begin to think that there is a problem. And that is really, really dangerous because especially for people who come from different backgrounds and in a rural community, it exposes children and a child to a lot of abuse. And then we don't know exactly what that does to the mind and to the psychology of the kids. So that is really, really a problem, and it should be addressed head on. I mean, in my experience, you don't even have to go left or right here. You really have to say clearly that here, if you beat your kids, you can go to jail. You just have to say it clear like that because that's what's going to happen. Yeah, people have trouble doing that because they grew up believing that physically punishing your child is the way of educating them. And then once they get here, it becomes problematic. So I don't see another way to go around it but to put the law between the kids and the parent and telling them that. Or begin to advise them to use different type of time out instead of, flogging or beating their kids.
Thank you. Well, we do not have any more questions at that time, so that brings us to the end of the webinar. On behalf of ECDC, I would like to thank you, Patrick, again for your very informative presentation. I believe it will be very helpful for our network. I also want to thank all of the participants on today's webinar and also for the great questions. For the participants, I'll be sending out the PowerPoint of this presentation, and we will also be sending out the recorded webinar that will go onto the ECDC YouTube channel. And also we will be sending out an evaluation when I send out all the rest of the materials. And I will also send out Patrick's contact information. So if you have any questions about anything he discussed today or want to discuss anything further, like partnering with Congolese communities or things like that, you can reach out to him or of course me as well. So thank you again, and I appreciate everyone's time. Thanks. Have a great day.